Pokemon Legends EA is bringing Mega Evolutions back, and that means that after a drought of around 2 generations, one of the most requested features in the series is coming back. But something else fans have been clamoring for literal decades now doesn't seem to be so lucky. I am talking of course about the Battle Frontier, or as some people call it, the best post-game Pokemon has ever had. Well, best is subjective of course, it definitely has a strong argument for most substantial, if you don't count Kanto's appearance in Johto games. But the more time passes, the more it feels as if everyone has just kinda accepted the Battle Frontier will never return. It feels like a certainty, much more so than other MIA features like Mega Evolutions ever did. Which is kinda odd to think about, because there were a good few years there where the Battle Frontier was an absolute staple of the series and hardly the overlooked black sheep it is now, with Game Freak almost pretending it never even happened. As I'm sure most of you watching know, the Battle Frontier was introduced in Pokemon Emerald as one of the exclusive new features to lure you into buying more or less the same game again. Even though it is exclusively a post-game area, throughout the story you frequently run into Scott, who is the owner and operator of the facility and effectively scouting you to come visit, until he gives you the proper invitation after you've beat the game and sail aboard the SS title. What's interesting though is that even before the post-game, you can already get a taste of what the Battle Frontier is waiting for you in one of Emerald's most overlooked features, the Battle Tents. These can be found in Slayport City and Verdanturf and Valarbor Town, replacing the contest halls, and essentially serve as practice areas for the Battle Frontier, getting you acquainted with their unique style of battling. Because that is essentially what the Battle Frontier is. 7 unique battle facilities that all really put your battle skills to the test in new ways, a natural evolution of the Battle Tower introduced in Crystal. And while that does mean what I guess you could call acknowledgement of competitive Pokemon, or at least the embracing of high-level battling, started in Crystal, it definitely took a great leap forward with the Battle Frontier. Up until this point, the Battle Tower has simply been effectively boring non-stop battling, with rewards that were barely worth it. But the Battle Frontier was essentially a sort of self-contained mini gym challenge. All 7 facilities have their own gym leaders, known as Frontier Brains, who can only be challenged after several lengthy runs, giving out a silver badge upon first being defeated and then a gold badge after another defeat after an even longer streak. In a way, this has actually been one of the most influential things the Battle Frontier has had on the series going forward. While the location itself has been missing for a long time now, battle facilities with dedicated leaders to defeat have become an absolute mainstay, with Scarlet and Violet really the only mainline game not to have it. And that all started here at the Battle Frontier in Emerald. But if you thought that just because people beg for the return of the Battle Frontier around every corner that these facilities were absolute peak Pokemon, then I think you're giving them too much credit. Especially in Emerald, the battle facilities are a pretty mixed bag if you ask me. Let's start positive though. The Battle Factory, run by Noland, is really cool. You have to fight your way to a lengthy streak using rental Pokemon, but are allowed to swap Pokemon with opponents you've defeated. You can however not see a summary of these Pokemon and have to rely on what you saw during battles. It's a very interesting way to approach battling, it really gets you out of your comfort zone, and especially at the time, there was nothing even remotely like this in the main series games. This was an easy standout. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's the Battle Palace. This is essentially just auto battles, as you might expect in a mobile game, except now in your actual mainline game. And sure, at the time, the connotation wasn't mobile games yet of course, but that doesn't mean this was suddenly fun. I mean, you literally have zero input here whatsoever, how is that enjoyable? The Battle Pike may have always been a favorite of child me for its cool Survivor-shaped building, but the fact of the matter is that its gameplay is essentially just constant luck-based pick-a-door. While at the very least you have input this time around, it still feels like a battle facility where strategy doesn't really matter, or at least not as much as you'd hope. Now, both the Battle Arena and the Battle Pyramid do change the formula in an interesting way, so that's good, but then there's also just the Battle Tower and the Battle Dome, which is in practice just another Battle Tower, just with different presentation. So point being, the Battle Frontier in Emerald is fun, it's a very good breath of fresh air, but it can also definitely be underwhelming if the constant requests for its return make you think it's some super special one-of-a-kind experience. And most importantly, in all its glory, I do think it also holds some answers as to why this location has never returned since. But before I talk about that, I want to dive into the next generation, which actually made the Battle Frontier even more prevalent. First, it was included in Platinum, expanding onto the Battle Tower that already existed, before then also making an appearance in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. And I don't know why, but I feel like this version of the Battle Frontier is even more forgotten than the Hoenn one is. I never, literally never, see people talk about it, and this game's Frontier brains feel like they are just some of the most forgettable battleable Pokemon characters of all time. Palmer and Caitlyn notwithstanding, obviously. I mean, have you ever met someone who bets for Dorak, or Thornton, or Agenta? I mean, these guys never even appeared in the anime. It's a borderline miracle to me they are in Pokemon Masters and even getting TCG cards to this day still. Anyway, I remember that when I was younger, this Battle Frontier felt a little underwhelming compared to the first. While the focus always was on battling, the first did feel more like an explorable area. It wasn't literally just battles, there was also a Sudowoodo to be caught and even a cave, which was meant to be more than it eventually became, but still. Gen 4's Battle Frontier is more cramped, and to me at least, had less of a sense of wonder to it. But hey, what really matters is how the facilities stack up, so how do those compare? Well, what immediately stands out is the lower number. Emerald had 7 of them, while Gen 4 only has 5. One of them is the Battle Tower, unchanged from Diamond and Pearl, and the Battle Factory also returns from Emerald, but the other 3 are brand new. First is the Battle Arcade, run by Dahlia. This one takes after the Battle Bike a little by adding a hefty dose of randomness to the battles, letting a largely random wheel decide which effects you and your opponent have to deal with. Despite only really adding another random layer on top of standard battles, I actually think this one works pretty well, simply because the effects are not too overbearing and whether they hit you or your opponent is pretty well balanced. You can even get lucky and have Dahlia negatively impacted before big showdowns. The Battle Castle has a pretty interesting setup as well, where you earn castle points that you can spend on healing or buying items, and even though I do think the Battle Hall is a little gimmicky, allowing you to only use one Pokemon, but not capping your level and playing around with that and type advantages, it is at least a very strong deviation from regular battles, and that's always a good thing. But of course, this was also immediately the final incarnation of the Battle Frontier. Going forward, we received simpler battle facilities, which were more one-note in their presentation, even if they were sometimes very awesome, like the Pokemon World Tournament from Black and White 2. Oras does allude to the Battle Frontier, but brings back the Battle Maison from X and Y instead, and thanks to the Game Freak Giga Leak from 2024, we know that something called the Battle Cruise was supposed to appear in Sun and Moon. This would have been a large cruise ship that sailed back to old Pokemon locations, as well as featured 5 battle facilities. But obviously this was never to be and ended up unused. Which means we are now on a 15-year-long Battle Frontier absence, with one crucial answer remaining a bit of a mystery all this time. Why? Why has the Battle Frontier never returned, yet have battle facilities done so consistently? Well, like I said, I think a very big part of it stems from what was already evident in Emerald. The Battle Frontier is really not as consistently fun or accessible as people who are only familiar with the concept may think. The Battle Frontier is a serious test, it's really difficult, and worst of all, from a modern game perspective, it doesn't just test your battle prowess, it also tests your dedication. Everything about the Battle Frontier revolves around streaks, winning battles 20 or 40 times in a row. Doing that for one facility is already quite a lot of grind to ask from a modern Pokemon player, I think. Doing it for 5 or 7 facilities is something that I can definitely understand Game Freak might consider more trouble than it's worth. Because don't forget, making a Battle Frontier is not as simple as just flipping a switch. If you include a Battle Frontier, that means something else is not getting made. That's just the inevitable result of game production. So rather than ask why is there no Battle Frontier, try to think for a second. What substantial thing that would take about as much time to develop as the Battle Frontier would you cut in order to facilitate it? Some of your answers I could see being stuff like picnics or camp, which I can imagine doesn't really appeal to more hardcore, lifelong Pokemon fans as much as the Battle Frontier. But now put yourselves in Game Freak's shoes for a second. Would you rather remove the casual friendly mechanic that kids, a huge audience you desperately want, really enjoy and could potentially make their Pokemon lifelong friends? Or would you cut the battle facilities that only a small minority of players can even really do, and the vast majority of these players might end up playing online competitive battles anyway? Because that's kinda the elephant in the room here. I don't think it's a coincidence that the disappearance of the Battle Frontier came at the same time as the rise of online competitive Pokemon battling. They only overlapped in Gen 4, where online battling first became a thing and started to get some traction, with Gen 5 only further expanding on it, possibly at the cost of the Battle Frontier. And nowadays, with modern games that could have included it, like Horaz, Sun and Moon, and perhaps even BDSP, I suspect that this is definitely a conversation that was held in the Game Freak offices as well. Sure, we could include the Battle Frontier, but with online battling being as big as it is now, does it even have a real, proper purpose beyond just being cool? Maybe not. And if being cool is what you're going for, then maybe stuff like the Delta episode is indeed the better focus for your resources and time. They aren't infinite. But don't get me wrong, I'd very much welcome the return of the Battle Frontier. In fact, ironically enough, from a mechanical standpoint, now would be easily the best time to give it a second chance and see if it can serve as a gateway to turn casuals or kids into competitive battlers. Back in Emerald, stuff like EV training, getting the right nature, it was an outright nightmare. But now, it's easy. Anyone can do it. It would instantly make the Battle Frontier way more accessible than it ever was. Maybe tone down the difficulty just a tad and get rid of the frankly outdated streak system, and you could truly have a perfect gateway for people to get into competitive battling without asking them to download a completely separate app like Pokemon Champions, or just go battle randoms online without any control over what kind of opponent they might face there. If we ever want to see the Battle Frontier return, I think this is the angle to take. A bridge that crosses the gap between the main story of Pokemon and the competitive battling formula of Pokemon. This gives the Battle Frontier a unique purpose, different from anything else currently in the games, and makes that constant dilemma of, is this worth our time and resources, skew a bit more in favor of the Battle Frontier. Whether such a thing would also satisfy long-term fans though, I'm very curious to hear that. So please, share in the comments below. Would you be open to the return of the Battle Frontier, provided it would be reworked to serve more as an entrance point for newcomers? Or are you team classic or bust? Let me know. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Pokemon content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.